I like work. I'm really lucky. Loads of people working hard, like busting their ass in jobs, and I did them, plenty of them, where they don't love their work, and they still work hard. There's women coming home from a day on their feet in the hairdressers that would be 10 times more wrecked than I will be when I go home from work tonight. They also work hard. I work hard, and I get to work hard at a job that I really, really love.
I want to ask you about Sinn Féin more generally. I mean, last year, Mary Lou McDonald said that newer members of the party shouldn't be judged for the party's history in terms of their legacy from the Troubles, which continues to be used as a lightning rod in public debate at times. And we've seen that occasionally, even in exchanges in the Dáil. Did that legacy weigh on your mind when you decided to join? Hello, and welcome to Conversations with Sam Assad. That's me, but it's not about me, it's about my guests. And today I'm joined by Louise O'Reilly, a former trade union official and now a TD for Sinn Féin. Louise was first elected in 2016 and is considered one of the party's most prominent voices in Dáil Éireann. We sat down for a wide-ranging interview about her journey from the trade union movement into politics, Sinn Féin's vision for the future, and what drives her, both in public life and beyond. Deputy O'Reilly, thank you for joining me. I appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.
You've described yourself as someone who was born a Republican socialist, due largely to your family's deep roots in the trade union movement. Tell us a bit about your upbringing in a very union-active household through your father, for example, but also your grandparents.
Yes, so it's a bit strange because I only knew one grandmother, but I know that my grandfather, who died just a couple of weeks after I was born, he was a shop steward with the ITGW. My father's mother was a shop steward with the Irish Women Workers Union. And my father then was a shop steward when I was born. My dad was a convener. He was a convener in the Fiat factory when I was born. And then he went on to become a full-time trade union organiser with, it's now called Unite, but it was the Amalgamated Transport and General Workers Union at that time. And that took him to Dundalk. And he was there. He built up the branch in Dundalk, and then he moved back to Dublin. And then eventually he was appointed elected, actually, I think, to the position of leader within Ireland of the 32 counties of the Amalgamated Transport and General Workers Union. So we would have grown up in a house, as myself and I've one sister, we would have grown up in a house where there's a lot of politics, a lot of trade union. And my dad was like, he's not a workaholic because, he had other things in his life, but he was very dedicated to his work. And it would have been very much part of what we did. Like, I can remember going on the tax marches, say, when my dad was speaking at them. That was back when my sister was only just born. So that was in the late 70s, early 80s, 1979 into 1980. And I remember that. So we would have been a very politically active household, active in terms of Republican politics, yes, but also active in terms of social politics and, that kind of, and labour issues and that. So that would have been a big influence on us growing up. We, like I say, my mum is also active in the trade union movement. So it would have been a kind of a whole of family thing as we were growing up. It was very much part of, like, I didn't understand when I was younger that other people at the weekend didn't go to protests. One of my earliest memories is going to protest down in Carnsore Point against the potential talk of a nuclear power plant down there, and we would have been down there. I remember that was a big festival. I was very small at the time. I think I was only about 3, maybe 4 at the time. I have a vague memory of it, not a very strong memory, of a vague memory of it, but that would have been, and that was completely normal, because what you do in your house when you're a child, that's completely normal to you. So I grown up thinking that everyone was came from a politically active household. It was quite a shock to me to find out that people just did other fun stuff at the weekend that we didn't do, but we did fun stuff too. But it would have been very political and very focused on the labour movement, focused on trade unionism, activism. All of that would have been very much part of our lives growing up.
So it sounds like politics, activism was very much in your blood. And I'm always curious to ask politicians this question about, was that always the plan? In most cases, it wasn't. Most people would have one plan in mind, and then life took them in a different direction, and they became a politician over time. So for you, though, did teenage Louise imagine that one day she'd be in the Dáil?
No, teenage Louise imagined that she'd probably end up being a journalist, which is where I when I was growing up, kind of thought that I would end up. I didn't think I'd be a union official, but I kind of when I became union official, it was very obvious. Like everyone was kind of going, yeah, it's probably always going to end up doing that, really, weren't you? So it was kind of always there. And when I would have, gone to work, it was always if there wasn't a union, I would have been trying to start one. If there was a union there, I would have been the shop steward. So, but when I was much younger, no, I wouldn't have had a notion of political activism. But at every step, when I started working in the union, what's that, like 20 years ago now, my first day there, I remember kind of thinking, this is the job I'll retire out of. That's me now. That's me set. I have a, career prospect, as it were. We started at the level of branch assistant in the union, and I thought, well, I could work my way up. I could, but I genuinely believed this is the job that I will retire from. So even though I think people might look and go, yeah, well, she was kind of heading in the direction of politics anyway, it wasn't very obvious to me until I sort of entered political. I was tangentially associated with political life because obviously in the union we would have been lobbying. I've had I think, not unique, but I've had the experience of, because not many Oireachtas members do, I've had the experience of being at a joint Oireachtas committee. I've appeared in front of the pack, just in relation to giving information about pensions and stuff like that. But like that would have been on the edge of politics, and then kind of moving in. It was kind of more incremental than anything else. So it wasn't like suddenly I went, geez, I'm a politician now. It kind of happened slowly, and over time. But then, yeah, kind of it was pretty obvious, I suppose, when you look at it now. It's like, yeah, you probably always going to end up there, but it wouldn't have been obvious to me, and it certainly wouldn't have been obvious to me as a teenager. Not at all. If I had a notion of anything, it was journalism. But
And you touched upon it there. I mean, before you entering electoral politics, you spent over a decade working as an organizer with SIPTU, representing nurses, representing healthcare workers. Can you bring us back to that time in your life? What were some of the moments, or even the battles that stick with you?
One of the ones that really sticks with me is being in government buildings as the Fianna Fáil government were on the way out around 2010, from 2009 really going into 2010, at the start of that really biting, awful, grinding austerity. And the first people in the firing line were people on the minimum wage, because of course they cut that by €1. But thereafter, there were pay cuts for public sector workers. I remember being in the Department of Finance and meeting officials. Well, not meeting, because I certainly had no interest in meeting them, but being in the same space as officials from the IMF. And that would have been fairly huge. I mean, even now, at this remove from it, if I'm watching one of those, those look back programs, reeling in the years, or whatever like that, if I'm watching those programs and they go back to that time, 2009, 2010, I get incredibly, I get very upset. They robbed us of our future anyway. But I would be, around that time was very hard. It was very, very hard. It was hard to go back to say I was representing nurses. Very hard to go back to nurses and say, well, look, if we don't, and the government changed 2011. Obviously, we had the Labour Party and Fine Gael in government, and having to go back to your members and say, well, you either accept a pay cut by ballot, or, as Brendan Howland told us he would do, you will have a pay cut by legislation. And that was very hard, because a lot of the people I was representing were women. Their husbands and their partners, they were losing their jobs. And then I was going back to them and saying, well, not only are you possibly the only breadwinner in the house, but there is, you're going to have to work longer hours. You're going to have certain cuts to your wages. All that was very hard. Those battles were hard. And then in the union, there are loads and loads of individual battles, loads of individual representations. You take a person from the start to the end of their case. I didn't win every case I took, not by a mile, but sometimes you do. And for those cases, for the resolution of individual disputes, they were very good. And my first experience of a big national dispute would have been very shortly after I was appointed to the position of National Nursing Officer within SIPTU, and we had a national strike for a compensation scheme for psychiatric nurses injured as the result of an assault at work, which wasn't in place for them, and we got that. I counted that as a huge. That wasn't all my work, not by a long stretch. That was the culmination of a very long campaign, but I was very lucky to have been involved at the very end of it. You got to see how government operates at a very high level. We were, very heavily engaged with the apparatus, with the Labour Court, with the LRC as it was then, and, hammering out that deal. That was tough. but we did that. That was very good. That would be, one of the standout moments for me, definitely.
And when it comes to political institutions, there can be a high expectation from the public that you can get in there and make change instantly happen. But the reality is that the process of changing a law or introducing legislation, it can be a long and often a convoluted process. So some would argue that real change comes from pressure outside the halls of power rather than inside of them. So what made you believe that you could do more as a TD than continuing on as a trade unionist?
I think because more and more my work was bringing me into government buildings, more and more, and into the houses of the Oireachtas, like more and more I was seeing legislation and that coming through that I felt I needed to be able to influence. And more and more we were seeing that the political establishment was actually a vehicle that could highlight our concerns in the union. But then I kind of felt like, geez, like if I was in there, I would be able to represent those as well, and bring that kind of, there's a lot of bosses and a lot of people who are, fairly well off in their life before they got into politics. There's enough of them in the Dáil, and I think the experience of being a workers' representative and bringing that to the floor of the Dáil, I kind of thought that was worthwhile doing. That's not the only perspective. The Dáil should be made up of a lot more perspectives than it actually is made up of, but it's a perspective that I thought was kind of important. But for me, it was like we would have been involved in a lot of campaigns, but they were all campaigns for political change. And it was, they were campaigns for, a change of the attitude of the government in some instances, change in the law in others. And I kind of thought, well, okay, if I'm going to step that up to the next level, political life is there. And there can be, like, it's tough in opposition. Like, it's a grind, it's a slog. I love my work and I'm very well paid, and I wouldn't deny that. But I do also, yeah, I think you can make some change. It's hard. It's very, very hard from opposition, particularly to make legislative changes, but you can give people that voice. So if you are, when legislation is being debated, it has very real impacts on people's lives very often. And sometimes the people who are impacted by it, they don't get to speak. They don't get a chance to have their case put forward. And like, I think sometimes you meet people, you hear about their story, what brought them to where they are, what impact the change in legislation is going to have, and you get the chance to put that forward, and you can say to the government, "We'll make this change if you will, but know that in so doing, that you are going to impact this group, and maybe you can change how you're going to do this to ensure that this group is actually included," or that kind of. So that I felt was kind of maybe missing a little bit, and I was not the only person doing it, and but that I could start to slot into that role.
Take me back to 2016. That was your first election campaign, and by all accounts, it was dramatic, right? I mean, Sinn Féin had placed you in Dublin Fingal, a constituency you weren't living in at the time, but you were taking on a sitting government minister, James Riley of Fine Gael, who I believe was the health minister at that time. Can you talk us through that experience from being selected to be on the ballot and then the result on count day?
So, yeah, well, look, just to be clear, it was going from a 4-seater to a 5-seater, so there was a bit more scope there anyway. It was a big ask to take someone from like a south side from Crumlin and pop her over to the north side. But I went about it the same way as I would have gone about any campaign and about organising anything within the union. First of all, you bring your team. I was blessed, absolutely blessed. We had 3 absolutely fantastic councillors, and then we had really, really good comrades and members within Sinn Féin there who were looking for a project and looking for, they wanted to get behind it. I had fantastic support and I was lucky. But my canvass schedule started around March 2015, and it was Tuesday night, Wednesday night, Thursday night for a canvass, and 2 canvasses on a Saturday. I did that with my full-time job in the union, so like combining the two was tricky, but it was doable. It's just time management, and I was lucky. I didn't have small kids. I think if you were trying to do this job with small kids, it'd be very different. My daughter was grown at that stage. She had a child of her own, as it goes. So I was kind of like, I was able to give that time. But I was finishing work in Liberty Hall or wherever I was finishing, and then I was heading out to canvass Tuesday night, Wednesday night, Thursday night, twice on a Saturday. And that was, I just said, door by door. That's how we won it, was literally door by door. But it was almost a year of canvassing. We took very little time off. And we were at it the whole time. Like, I had 2 jobs to do. One, obviously, I had to build the organisation, which was important, but I also had to ensure that people knew me because they didn't know me, and I wasn't local. So that I'd like people vote for the person that they know. They vote for the person who they think will best represent them. But you're knocking on doors, and people are like, "Well, where do you live?" And it's like, "Well, I live in Crumlin." They said, "Will you move here if you're elected?" I said, "Yes, I would. I was more than happy to do it. I knew it would make my life so much easier if we were able to live there. My husband's a flexible enough job that it was a real consideration." But I was saying to people, like, I'm not going to move. I will move if I'm elected. I'm not going to move now because that wouldn't have been feasible in the middle of an election campaign. But we campaigned our socks off. It was hard, but it was good. It was very enjoyable. We didn't know if the seat was there for us or not. We didn't know if we knew that James Riley was unpopular, and I don't think that that will come as breaking news to anybody. And we knew that he would have been vulnerable. We also knew that Darragh O'Brien, having lost his seat, was angling very much to get his what he would have seen as his seat back, and that would have left a little bit of scope there. I didn't think it was feasible that people would, go into the ballot box on one day and vote for Fine Gael and then come back the next day and vote for Sinn Féin. And I'm not sure that that's necessarily what happened. But I do think Dr. Riley was unpopular, and that was an unpopular government. So they went in with 2 TDs. They came out with 1. And then obviously there was what you might call a spare seat there, which it wasn't handed to us or gifted to us. Like, we worked damn hard for that. And it was a case of on the doors. That's where people got to know me. It was door by door, literally, kind of, and then back around again to those estates that you had canvassed, say, in April 2015. You were going back to them in November, and people were saying, "Well, actually, no, I did see you before. You were around here before." And they know, and they know where they can get you, giving your contact details to people, saying to them, "If I can help with anything," starting to work on cases, working with counsellors, doing all that kind of stuff. So yeah, we built it from scratch, and we built it from there. But I was quite surprised. I don't like election. I love election counts when I'm not on the ballot. I've only ever stood in elections 3 times in my life. By Jesus, I have hated the count every single time. But I love election counts. But I didn't know. I stayed away from the election count. I was very anxious. I'm a worrier anyway by nature. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I couldn't think. And so I didn't know that I was going to get. And even after it became apparent that I was going to get elected, one of the local newspapers were there, and they said, "Okay," so this was on the Sunday, "This, Louise, will you do an interview now? And we'll do it as if you've been elected." And I said, "Jesus, I will not. I mean, anything could happen." And they were like, "No, not that, and you're going to get elected. Like, we're just waiting on the result to be announced." And I said, "Maybe we should just leave it now until it's formal." And you see your man looking at me going, "I'm going home." I said, "I've been here for 2 days. I'm going home as soon as this is over. If I get my interview with you out of the way, that's handy. Then I can just walk out the door." Whereas I was a bit kind of like, "Well, let's wait and see him." My husband's like, he was there doing the tally, and he's like, "No, it's okay. You can relax. You are going to get elected." I was like, "I probably shouldn't say anything until it's formally announced." And he's like, "No, they're just counting up. You've got elected. It's okay." But I didn't I didn't quite believe it, if you know what I mean, because we had worked so hard for it. And then it was like, "Oh, when the election happens, when the election happens, when the election happens." And then it did. And it was like, Jesus, this is very real. And seeing that, I said this the last time I got elected, see when those ballot boxes open and you see that someone has put the number 1 beside your name, like, that blows my mind. This one got up in the morning, they, got themselves dressed, put their lipstick on, got into the car, or got their umbrella, whatever they did. They walked down to the polling station, they looked down and they went, "I'm going to back that woman." Jeez, that's a hell of that I find that, I know politicians are always saying everything that happens humbles them, but like that, genuinely, I look at those ballot boxes. I say I've only ever run for election 3 times in my life, and every single time when I have looked at the ballots being counted, I've gone, Jesus, yeah, no, that, like, it does mean something. I wouldn't, and I say that to people in my own constituency, they say, "Oh, I give you the vote," and I'd be like, I always stop and I go, "That means a lot. It actually does. It's an endorsement. It's huge," and it would never ever take that for granted.
And at the time, some critics talked about you being parachuted, was the term being thrown around, parachuted into the constituency. Did that interpretation of the situation bother you?
Nah, not at all. Schlep. I mean, I got elected at the end of the day. I got elected because I met people, because I stood on people's doorsteps, because they got to know me like that rather than through the newspapers or anything like that. So no, look, people are always going to say, God knows what to say about me now. Uh, but you'd never be good enough for some people. I live in the constituency now. After that wouldn't be good enough for them either. I just let them off. I mean, at the end of the day, the ballot box. We did our talking at the ballot box, as they say, and we got the seat, so we were delighted. So it's like, yeah, and people did say that, and you knock on doors, people be like, "And where are you from?" I'm like, "Oh, Ballyfermot. I live in Crumlin." "Oh, right. And what do you know about round here?" It's like, "Well, probably not as much as I need to. That's why I'm learning." And you need to be honest with people and go, "No, I don't know where every laneway in North County Dublin is, but I learn." It's like when I was in the Union. I used to represent nurses. I'd never been a nurse before. I'd never worked in the health service, didn't have a clue about it, but I had to learn, and you learn. And then I moved on. I went to the education sector. I was sector organizer in charge of the education sector for a while then. And again, I would have had some knowledge of it because I'd previously worked for the Department of Education. And then you come into it, you bring the knowledge that you have, and then you learn. Like there's no point. It's one thing people have a very keen sense of is when someone's trying to pull the wool over their eyes. So that kind of, oh, no, I'm here and I know loads about it. Like, don't pretend. People aren't stupid. It's like I don't live here. I don't know a wild amount about it, but I'm learning, and I am willing to say that I am not the finished article. I'm a work in progress, but I want to learn, and I want to figure out how I can be your representative and represent you well. And I'd like to think we did a good job doing that. As I said, a brilliant team around me, so I was lucky. And then we got the seat.
After all this time, you know where all the alleyways are now in
I
the
do.
constituency, right? Yeah, I mean,
I do. I've been down them. I've been, and I've probably raised issues with them with the council and all the rest of it now. But yeah, you learn. You learn.
you've been outspoken about the lack of women in politics, and women have been long underrepresented in Irish politics. Even today, only about a quarter of TDs are women, one of the lowest proportions in Western Europe. To ask you point blank, do you think women make better politicians than men in terms of how they lead, negotiate, and govern?
Well, I'd like to see a woman Taoiseach specifically. I'd like to see Mary Lou McDonald as the woman Taoiseach. But I think that we can, like, see that figure that you say, right? You're right. It's like 22% or something, but that's not reflective of every party. So my party, we're over 30%. So over 30% of our elected reps are women. See, in the north where there's no legislation, over 50% of our elected reps are women, and you have to have that pipeline. You have to have that pipeline of women coming through. So a lot of our newer TDs, like Sean and O'Reilly and Grace, Maura Devine, people like that, they would have been councillors, and then they would have come up, like, up to the party, up to the council, and then and build on it. You need to have that pipeline coming through. And it's not actually just about women. The Oireachtas just does not reflect society. It does not. You look around, if we were to leave here now and walk down to Grafton Street and just kind of do a 360 and look around and see all of the faces and the people that we see, and then we were to go to the Oireachtas and look at that, they're not the same. So there's a lot of work to do. I think we need to see more women coming through, because our experiences are different. Like, see, during COVID, when they closed the shoe shops, right? Everyone was like, well, that's it. Your feet are finished growing. Sure, you're grand. Your whatever size your shoes are, that's it. And it's like, hello, what about kids? Kids, their feet won't stop growing. We need to probably think about how kids are going to access shoes. It was women that were raising those concerns in the first instance. So I think what you need is a diversity of voices and experience, and women are definitely part of that. And, we're 50% of the population. We're nowhere near 50% in the Oireachtas. But whenever I'm asked this question, I'm always trying to go, we need to disaggregate it. Like, you look at Fianna Fáil as an example. Micheál Martin had 8 positions to give out at the cabinet table, and he gave 2 to women. One full to it was to Norma Foley. Like, you'd have to wonder about the pipeline coming through those parties. Simon Harris was no better. He was 2 out of 7. So you've got to look at everybody has to be pulling in the same direction. I mean, like, my party leader, obviously, is a woman. Deputy leader is a woman. Clearly the party is a very welcoming place where women do well. But not all parties are like that. I mean, what's the Labour Party? 2 out of 11. Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, their numbers are very, very low. So there's a lot of work to do, but we need to start somewhere, and we need to see more representation definitely of women, but you need to be proactive about it. Like I would have seen that in the union as well. Like if you think about when I was starting in the union first, all of the major unions were all led at the bigs, and like the INMO as an example was the INO at the time. Their leaders were men. They're good men, decent men, hard working men. I wouldn't take it off them. But like 92% of the members or 90% of the members are women, and 100% of the leadership was men. It was like good men, like them, and I know them. They're very effective representatives. But you'd have to kind of say, "Geez, like, can we do a bit better than that?" But then you have to look and not blame the women, because I don't think that's fair, and that can happen sometimes. Or do women put themselves forward? Do they push themselves enough? Do you know? Or people would say to you, people don't like to vote for women. Like, well, give them the bloody chance. You know, maybe that's true, but give them the chance. Run credible women in winnable seats. Give people an actual choice. Don't wait till 2 or 3 weeks out from, from the close of nominations. Throw a woman on the ballot there just to kind of even it up. Or, I've heard women in Leinster House, I've heard other TDs, not from my party as it goes, from other parties, refer to women in their own organisation as gender quotas. Like, we've a lot of work to do. It's an attitudinal thing as well. And it's not just about like you often see male politicians, I'm not going to name them, but you know who they are. They stand there and then it's like, okay, assemble. And then the women come in behind them. They're not representative of their parliamentary party. Their parliamentary party is not mostly women, but they come in behind them as they go, see, you can see the women in the shot, in the brightly coloured clothes. You know the ones I'm talking about. They do themselves no favours. They do the cause of women in politics no favours. But they act as a kind of a smokescreen for the failure of their party. And that, to me, is where we need to start that work. The gender quota legislation, much as I don't like it, I wish it wasn't necessary, but it is. But we need to capitalise on that. So it's not just about sticking women on the ballot. It's actually about running credible women in winnable seats so that we have that pipeline coming through, women with a track record, so that you can say, like people say, people don't vote for women, they like to vote for men. Give them the choice. Give them a realistic choice and then see how people vote. As I think they'll back the person that's going to turn up, do the work, and that's going to be an effective representative for them. And I think the vast majority of people are past caring about the gender or anything else about the person that's on the ballot paper. They want the person who's going to turn up and do the work for them. And you need to give women the chance to show that they can do that. And then we need to look at the whole range of diversity that does not happen in our parliament that should be happening.
I want to circle back to your time in opposition. You've been in opposition since 2016, almost 10 full years. In Dáil debates, you often speak quite frankly and forcefully. How do you approach that role of opposition? Like, is it difficult to strike a balance between challenging the government and offering those real solutions?
Well, I think you have to be solutions focused, and I'd like to think that I have been. And I can tell you that I do often express anger on the floor of the Dáil, but it's genuine and it's heartfelt. And I usually bring it directly from my constituency to the floor of the Dáil, or I bring it directly from my own experience to the floor of the Dáil. And you can make a difference from opposition, not in the way that you can in government. I mean, that's, and I wouldn't be silly enough to suggest that, but you can, and you can also, as I've said, like you can be that voice for a person who feels that the government is indifferent to what's going on in their life, or a person who feels that they are not seen or heard by government. You can bring that to the floor of the Dáil, and we can have that, like that. I often say, like, I believe in the wisdom of crowds. I do. I think that we need to have a multiplicity of voices heard within the Dáil in order to be effective legislators. I think sometimes the government are completely tone deaf to what people are saying. That's fine, that's their business, they're the government, we're opposition. But I do think that, and we have seen it effectively when the opposition come together, we can affect a small amount of change. But also, we can do like one of the first pieces of legislation that I would have got passed was like, it was a motion that had legislation in it, was in relation to the granting of medical cards for children in receipt of domiciliary care allowance. Automatically get the medical card. 99% of them would be entitled to it anyway, but there's just a lot of form filling on. So it was to give them an automatic entitlement to a medical card once they were in receipt of DCA. Now, you could say that that was government policy, and it was, but they weren't doing anything about it. They were very slow. So we brought the motion, and then we brought in activists who'd been working in that space for a long time, they were in the gallery when the motion was passed, and the government did. Now the government did it, then they turned around and said, "Actually, we were always going to do that anyway," and maybe they were, but it was important that the people who were part of that campaign felt like they had brought it to its conclusion, that they had actually, and I was able to vocalise their frustration at the government saying, "Now we're going to do it," but not actually doing it. And I think we brought sufficient pressure that the government only did the thing that they said they were going to do, but that we can do that. So, like, you can mark those kind of milestones and those wins. They're not massive, but they are important.
And sticking on the dynamics of opposition, there's often a perception, especially from the government side, not just against Sinn Féin, but against any opposition party. And we hear this from governments around the world in terms of their opposition in their respective parliaments, this point of opposition opposing just for the sake of it. And of course, holding power to account is a vital part of democracy. But do you think there's a point where opposition can become performative in that it's more about landing that line that's going to go viral than actually shaping outcomes?
No, I don't think so. I think it is important that the government are held to account. I think the government will often say that that's just opposition given out for the sake of it. But as I said to you, any anger I've ever expressed on the floor of the Dáil has been very, very heartfelt. In fact, there was on the Dáil record an exchange between myself and Micheál Martin when he was in opposition as well, when he accused me of performative anger. And I said, "Well, I can assure you, Deputy Martin, that every single bit of anger is very much heartfelt." And it is, because I get angry at what the government does on behalf of my constituents. I get angry at what the government doesn't do on behalf of my constituents. And I see, like in my constituency, there are 3 TDs. Not, I'm the only one that has an office. I have an office. I do clinics. I am very available to my constituents, and that's incredibly important to me. I know that people do it differently, and if they can do them, I'll do me. But I hear and see perhaps what they don't hear and see, because I am available, because my office is there, because Marion is in my office 5 days a week, because my office is open. People drop in, and people they make appointments to do all of that as well. But we see the very cold face, the business end of what the government decides to do is felt by the people in my area. And when they don't like it, when they are suffering, when they can't find homes for when their kids can't get homes, when they're waving goodbye to them in the airport because they're going to Australia, yeah, you can be damn sure that I will represent that on the floor of the Dáil and apologise to nobody for it. And if it makes the government uncomfortable, well, then they need to own their own actions and the implications of that. But I think it is hard in opposition. And what people say, even the hardest day in government is still better than the best day in opposition, right? And that might be true. I've never been in government and I don't know that. But I do know that the people who send me to the Dáil, that's Teachta Dáil is a messenger. I am only their messenger. I bring their message. And if they're angry, by Christ, I'm going to be angry. And if, by the way, if the government are doing something, they're doing it right, if there's something we agree with, you will not find a more constructive person than me. And when the occasion has demanded it and when it has been appropriate, I have worked with government ministers, with TDs from government parties. I have worked cross-party on committees. And, I would say that to people, when you come into, you're doing the tour of Leinster House, particularly with secondary school students, we go down to the basement and I'm like, see here down in the committee rooms, you don't see this on the 9 o'clock news, but this is the engine room, and this is where you actually can shape policy, and you can really get in depth into an issue, and you can actually probe something. And it is, to a large extent, the place where you leave your party politics aside and you go in and you try and work constructively cross-party where you can, to work on reports, to work on legislation, to do that kind of stuff. So, like, I think there's that's a tag, and I think it's a bit of a lazy tag that the government try to stick on the opposition. That it's just performative and that actually nothing will change. There is a reason why we have an opposition and a government. We hold them to account. If we do it robustly, they don't like that. They characterise it a certain way. That's grand. But I would apologise to nobody. My constituents are angry. You can be damn sure that I'm going to be representing that anger on the floor of the Dáil.
I want to ask you about Sinn Féin more generally. I mean, last year, Mary Lou McDonald said that newer members of the party shouldn't be judged for the party's history in terms of their legacy from the Troubles, which continues to be used as a lightning rod in public debate at times. And we've seen that occasionally, even in exchanges in the Dáil. Did that legacy weigh on your mind when you decided to join?
No, I grew up in a border town. I spent 10 years living in Dundalk. I saw it firsthand, the damage that the border did. I saw it firsthand, the damage that the conflict did to communities in the north. I saw the people who were dealing with the discrimination wrought on them by the British government, by a government that cares very little for any person or group or county on this island. And as I say, I'm a Republican. I just we used to cross the border all the time. I lived in Dundalk. We went up and down. We went shopping. We went swimming. We crossed the border a lot. My dad used to cross the border a lot for work. The border is artificial. It never made any sense to me, where it is, why. When I was younger, most people won't remember this now, of course, but when I was younger, my ma would have had a punt purse and a sterling purse. And, it doesn't make any sense on an island this size to have two currencies, two health systems, two education systems, two transport systems. We're a small island. Unity makes sense. It has always made sense to me. And when you see the damage that was inflicted on this island by partition, I think anybody who thinks about it and considers it could see that the end of partition could be the beginning of something really, really positive for this island.
And sticking on that subject of United Ireland, that's a core aim for Sinn Féin. Mary Lynn McDonald recently spoke about a referendum on this within the next 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
You've touched upon it there. She says the same, that the North being part of the UK makes no economic sense, as she believes. This can be an emotional topic with strong feelings on all sides. Paint us a picture, if you can, of where you see this question heading. Do you feel we're getting closer to seeing a United Ireland, say, in your lifetime?
Oh God, yeah, definitely. And I can paint you the picture and I can map out the roadmap because it goes directly to a citizens' assembly. And we have we have a good track record on citizens' assemblies. We did one for the referendum on the Eighth Amendment. We've done one on directly elected mayors, and we had I think it was a constitutional convention, wasn't it, on equal marriage? Like, a citizens' assembly is a really good idea. So yeah, the Irish unity won't happen just like that. It won't happen unless we plan for it. And we can't plan for it unless we're talking to everybody. So yes, there are questions. Of course, there's going to be questions. It's a big constitutional change. But you see what happened in England and the Brexit referendum. That is exactly what happens when you go to make a big decision without assembling all the facts and having a chance to interrogate the facts. That didn't happen with Brexit. So at the end of the day, every single person that voted for Brexit, they all voted for something else. But you see, when we went in to vote, and I'm not comparing women's healthcare to the Brexit referendum in any way, shape or form, but what I'm saying is when we went to vote for the Eighth Amendment, for the repeal of the Eighth Amendment, we knew exactly what we were voting for. It was set out because we had a citizens' assembly. Arising out of the citizens' assembly, we'd had an Oireachtas committee, and then arising out of that, we had a referendum and a vote. So we had a lot of deliberation, and I think people are up for that conversation now. And I think a citizens' assembly provides a really good role model in terms of how we can do that. That's the place to bring the questions. That's the place to have that kind of conversation on constitutional change. How fast are we going to move? What's it going to look like? Flags, symbols, emblems, all of those things. We need to talk about that, and we need to talk about it in a structured way. And citizens' assemblies are a very structured, decent way to get the mood of the Irish people, where we're at, what we're thinking, what's going on, and to tease out those issues. Because of course there might be issues that will be contentious, but there's nothing so contentious that you couldn't talk about it, that we will have a chance to to deliberate and to really get into the meat and bones of an issue, which I think is what the Citizens' Assembly can do. And that's where, so that's, we're looking for a roadmap. That's exactly where it's headed. And like, you look at events like, the organisation Ireland's Future. They've organised a lot of really important conversations with people from a diversity of views, from a diversity of political backgrounds, but they'll talk about Irish unity, what it might mean, how it could be achieved. Are we going too fast? Should we slow it down? Are we not going fast enough? And again, people will have their view, but the Citizens' Assembly, I had occasion to watch it during the Eighth Amendment because I knew I was going to have to deal with, as the health spokesperson, I was going to be dealing with whatever came out of it. So I watched 99 people in a chair come together and really, really deliberate and really think and call in experts and hear from people and have those conversations in tables of 9 and 10 and like that was a powerful thing to watch. And I think we can replicate that again, to have a difficult conversation for some people, an easy conversation for others, but to actually sit down and have that really concentrated, good discussion.
But why do you think some unionist leaders have labelled that push for a border poll to be divisive? Is it because they're not having those kind of conversations that you're referring to?
But you see, I think those conversations are happening even if they're not having them. I think that people look, Irish unity makes sense on a number of levels. We have, when I was growing up, we'd a hard border. You couldn't cross the border. You had to queue. I remember spending like a long time in the queue going over the border, and a long time in the queue coming back over the border. If we went up to Newry to go swimming or whatever, that's not there anymore. There's seamless transit. If you go up to Belfast, and you get in the train in Connolly Station, you pay with your credit card. You tap. Then you go up, like if you're tapping, you're not going to notice. I mean, you're not going to think, am I in a different jurisdiction or not? And I think the border makes less and less sense to people. And I think Brexit really concentrated people's minds in terms of a vote that was, the North voted to remain, but they were dragged out of the European Union. Our young people were dragged out of the European Union, dragged out of any prospect of Erasmus, all of that kind of stuff, that was taken from them. The folly of the border and the difficulties created by the border, which had become more or less seamless and then sort of came back into play again when we started talking about Brexit. I think people looked at that and they went, oh, Jesus, I don't want to go back to that. Not queuing at the border, not a hard border. And that really concentrated people's minds. And they said, well, okay, well, for some people and in the Unionist community as well, like Irish unity means membership of the European Union for others. And yeah, of course, there are going to be people who will say, well, look, this is a place that I don't want to go. But equally, there are people living in the north, by the way, who don't want to live on a partitioned island. There are people in the south who don't want to live on a partitioned island. And it's about that. It's about having that discourse and being respectful of people's opinions and their views, but also allowing the conversation to happen, people to know what it is that they're going to be voting for, and then to put the referendum to the people. But we won't win it if we don't plan for it, and we can't plan for it if we're not talking about it.
You mentioned the Brexit referendum there, but what lessons do you think we can learn from the referendum in Scotland about Scottish independence? I mean, that didn't pass over 10 years ago, but officials there are still trying to push for another vote on it. I know that the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, has come out and said, listen, I can't imagine another independence referendum for Scotland taking place during my time as PM.
I tell you what was really interesting about the Scottish referendum, and I remember seeing a woman speak at a Sinn Féin Ardèche in Derry. It was around 2015, and she talked about the swing, about how they went in with a certain number, more or less guaranteed, which I think is kind of understood. There's a certain number of people in Scotland who will always and forever vote for independence. There are others who will always and forever vote against it, and then there are a large group in the middle. And she had tracked the movement and the way that people swung in towards independence. So in the end, it was a lot closer than people thought it was going to be going into, which you could see that there was a big swing. And I think for those of us who are interested in Irish unity, we need to look at that. And I've looked at a bit of it, and we need to look at that and look at what it was that people had questions. So obviously they were kind of veering towards, like, to say, if you don't know, vote no. If you're not sure, stick with the status quo. So people had questions, and until those questions started to be answered by the people who were in favour of independence, they weren't persuading them, because people were like, well, we'll just stick where we are for the minute. And then the more they talked about it, and that's what it was people who were open, they had their ears open. They might not have been clamouring for Scottish independence, but they had their ears open to be persuaded. And the swing was huge. The swing was massive. So that I learned the importance of having that discussion, and also winning it, like the appetite to go back maybe isn't there because it wasn't because it wasn't won, but it was closer than people thought it was going to be. But for me, that underlines the reason to ensure that you have the conversations, you answer the questions, you let people know what it is, what's going to look like, how how they're going to be, what it'll mean for them, so that people can answer that question themselves and look at it and say, okay, I'm globally, I understand where we're going to be, but like all that attempting to get me a cup of coffee, what does this actually mean for me? and that's what people do, and they care about their own situation, and that's entirely understandable. So being able to answer those questions, I think, is important as well, so that when people go to vote, that they vote, I hope they vote for Irish unity, and that when we have the chance to have that people go in, they know what it is they're going to be voting for, they understand it, they've had a chance to have their questions answered, and if they're nervous or if they're anxious or if there's something that they're worried about, they've had a chance to ask that question and answer it. And that was what swung people in Scotland coming in towards the referendum. I've talked to people who were involved in the campaign. They say if they'd had another 2 weeks, they reckon the swing was going in that direction. You can never know that. But for me, it's like you call a border poll when you believe the conditions are right and that you know that you have a good chance of winning it, but you have to plan for it. You have to talk about it.
And in saying that, if a referendum were to take place, and let's just say hypothetically the majority vote no, would that fight for a united Ireland continue for Sinn Féin?
Yes. And that would just signal that we had more work to do. But I think virtually all of the parties in the Oireachtas will tell you that they support in some shape or form Irish unity. They might support it. I think sometimes it's just down to timing. That some people will say, well, yes, Irish unity, but we must go slowly. Others will say, yes, Irish unity, but we need to plan for it and pick up some momentum and start doing it now. The same in the North. The perpetual Unionist majority has been broken. My colleague, comrade and friend, Michelle O'Neill, is the First Minister in a state designed to ensure that would never happen. So never let anyone tell you that that change can't happen. Change can happen. Change has happened on this island, and it was and it was recognised as such. I picked it up on the doors as well from people saying, geez, wasn't it great now to see Michelle? And, Michelle has worked really hard to be that First Minister for all, to acknowledge that some people said, okay, but we have concerns, as I say, the entire state was rigged up to ensure that, someone, a Republican like Michelle, would never be the First Minister. Michelle became the First Minister. She broke that ceiling, but she did it in what I believe is a very inclusive way. She did it by talking to people. She did it by being her authentic self and being a representative for everybody, from every community. But, change can happen. It can be very positive. I don't think anyone would suggest that Michelle is not doing a really good job, because she is. And change can be good. But you need to acknowledge people are a bit scared of change sometimes. They might want to go at what they know, maybe just because they're worried about what they don't know, rather than, so you got to show them that, yeah, it's not that it's risk-free or anything like that, but you show people, here's the path, we've thought about it, there is a pathway, we're not just going to jump into this like they did with Brexit and then afterwards and go, oh, sorry, there's no money for the NHS, oh, that was just a joke, oh yeah, that actually we have thought about it, we have, and again, that's your citizens' assemblies, that's those conversations. There's ordinary people saying, well, I like the idea of a united Ireland, but what's the education system going to look like? But we work that out, have a conversation about it today. And it gives a chance to us to actually start reimagining what our republic could be like. And I think that's a good thing. I think it's good. You want kids talking about it in school. You want people talking about it in university. You want to be able to build that up and have, really sort of you can't address every single one of the concerns, but look at what people are thinking about and think, okay, well, how will that work in a united Ireland? How are we going to progress that? And again, it's that, lots of voices, loads of conversations, listening and understanding that for some people, they might be cautious. For others, they want to just run headlong into it. And it's about finding that balance through the Citizens' Assembly, through that dialogue, and bringing everyone, many people as you can, along with you.
I want to reflect on the general election last year, because arguably you could say we didn't see change in terms of the Irish government. I know Sinn Féin clearly aimed to lead the next government, so facing another 5 years in opposition was not the plan, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
You did come out with 39 seats, the second largest party in the Dáil. The party's first preference vote did go down by 5 points, I believe, from 2020. And Sinn Féin had been polling very strongly in the lead up to the election. What do you think happened during the campaign that led to a softer performance than anticipated?
I think a lot of people had written us off in the run into the campaign. Our polling numbers were quite low compared to where we ended up. So we picked up, we're a good campaigning party, and we have a very good campaigner for a leader. She is, I think, widely acknowledged. Even her most ardent critics will have to acknowledge Mary Lou McDonald is a savage campaigner. And we saw, again, we talk about the swing. We saw the swing move towards us. People say if we'd had another week, maybe. Actually, look, you wouldn't know that. But we were going in a very positive direction. We definitely improved our poll ratings as the campaign went along. Now, the polls that happen when there's no election on the horizon, they don't really mean anything because people's minds are not concentrated. They're not thinking about a government. Our job now as the lead party of opposition is to show people that we can credibly put a government together, that we can lead that government, and that that government can actually bring about the change that I think we need. But that change in a positive way. We need to explain what that change means. We need to show people how it's going to work. And I think we didn't get into government. We wanted to be in government after the last election, but you just try again. That's, the as sure as night follows day, there'll be another election, and you fight that election as it presents itself to you. That's what we will have to do the next time. Of course, we were disappointed. We didn't get the election that we wanted, but having said that, we were written off in a lot of constituencies, where we had, if you think my own area in Fingal East, not one journalist, bar, and I have to credit him for it because he's the only one, Fionn Sheehan, gave us even a half a chance of taking that seat. Now, by the way, I knew that we were in a really good place to take that seat because we had a smashing candidate in Anne Graves. We had a good foundation there, and we had a good ground operation going on there. So I kind of thought we were in a good position to take that. We were completely written off. The same in Kildare with Sean O'Reilly. No one gave her a chance. And yet, I think she came second, or I think the second that she came, and again, like Anne getting elected, that was a big ask. And there were a good few of those across the board. We brought in a lot more women, newer TDs, fresher perspective, all of that. So there were some positives to take out of it. But look at, I'd be silly if I said we went into it not wanting to be in government. We went into it wanting to be in government. We're not in government, but that means that we have to be more effective in our job as the leaders of the opposition, and to ensure that where we can, that we work cross-party, that we work with others in the opposition, and that we hold the government to account. I mean, people voted for a government that told them they'd built 40,000 houses, and it turns out that was not correct. So we need to go back and we need to present people with our credible, solutions-focused alternative to this government.
In terms of being in government, Mary Lou McDonald, after the election, the results were coming in and we saw the numbers. She spoke about how she was certainly willing to have the conversations with Fianna Fáil, with Fine Gael, to possibly form a government. That feeling was certainly not returned. And we know Fianna Fáil's position. They believe that there's fundamental policy differences. Fine Gael has suggested the same. A lot of commentators will talk about this and they'll say, okay, there's a chance that you would be able to put together a programme for government because the bigger parties have worked with Labour over the years and the Greens and Democratic Left if we go back further. But they feel that over time, a government like that wouldn't serve the full 5 years. It could fall apart after a year or two because of those differences. That's what they'll say.
Yeah.
But do you truly believe you could work with Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael in government?
I'm old enough to remember when Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael used to have policy differences. Yes, it's a different world, really, a different time, a long, long time ago. The parties of Devon Collins, of course, came together when it was politically expedient to do so. They came together actually in a very negative way, because they came together to keep out another party, which I think that's not a great foundation for a government. That's how they formed their government. That's fine. But no, in terms of we had said going into the election that we would talk to everybody. Now, look, we can't make people talk to us, right? They want to ignore the second largest party in the Dáil. That's fine. We've been told that the government will return, but actually Fine Gael lost seats, and Fianna Fáil gained, but Fine Gael lost, and they lost a considerable amount of seats. And this business of who would you talk to? Would you talk to this person? Would you talk to that person? You should talk to everybody. I mean, that's what we said. We said we will talk to everybody, but on the basis of a left Republican agenda for government, and you talk to them. Would we have been able to reach a compromise, a programme for government with the like of Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael? Maybe. perhaps, and maybe the policy differences would be so far apart that we wouldn't have been able to bridge that gap. But we had said we would talk. And I think when you stand on someone's door and they say to you, look, do you want to be in government? So, yeah, they say, well, look, coalition governments are the order of the day. There's no single party government anymore. So who are you willing to talk to? I was honest. I said to people, we talk to everybody. They said, oh, well, would you talk to such and such? We said we talk to everybody. And the reason we said we talk to everybody was because that's what we had said to our voters, and we owed it to them to go and have that conversation. They didn't want to have that conversation with us, much more comfortable in their, kind of right-wing little bubble. That's fine. That's their business. As I said, the government went to the people with that figure of 40,000 houses that we now know was not credible or true. And I think that's very regrettable that's that they attempted to put that figure forward when they knew that it wasn't the case, or at the very least there was ample information out there to tell them that wasn't the case. But look, on the basis of that and off the back of what they said, their government was formed. I don't believe it's a positive government. I don't believe it's a good government. But look, that's we have to put up with that. So our job then is to go back to opposition, to hold the government to account, and we'll do that. But we did say we talked to everyone. I mean, could I see us being able to cut a deal or to form a programme for government with Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael? They would have to change quite a bit. I mean, the level of homelessness, there's 16,000 homeless people. 5,000 of those are children. Social and affordable housing is not where it should be at all. As I say, they were fast and loose with the facts in relation to the number of houses that were being built. Like, housing is the single biggest issue that faces, I think, us as politicians. We have put forward very credible solutions in terms of housing. They would have to talk to us in relation to that. And I think, I don't know, I'm not a genius, but I feel like if you keep doing the same thing and you keep following these policies that the government are following, that figure of, like I say, when I started in the Dáil, I think the number of homeless people was about 5,500, 16,000 now, gone up. Rents in my area, where I think the average was about 1,450, it's 2,300, something like that now. So, house prices, again, gone up about 75 grand even in the last year. So all of the pressures that the government are putting on ordinary people, they would have to be willing to work constructively to alleviate those pressures. They'd have to be willing to listen to what's happening in the lives of ordinary people, to maybe not favour developers, large institutional investors so much, and actually think more about ordinary people and how they get affordable, secure housing. But if they were willing to have that compromise, of course, you could talk to them, yeah.
But just to push back for a moment, because I know you've heard this, but the defence from government will be, when it comes to housing anyway, they point to these examples of, Sinn Féin members are voting down housing developments across Dublin. How do you respond to that?
But we're not, though. You see, this is the thing. And, the facts absolutely contradict that nonsense narrative. Okay, we will always object to the cheap disposal of public land for private developers, because social and affordable housing, public housing, should be built on public land, and we will stand up for that 8 days a week. Where there are observations to be made in relation to planning, politicians do that. They make an observation. That's not necessarily an objection, but that's asking the developers and the planners to take into account, a certain aspect. Perfectly entitled to make an observation. But we don't vote down developments. And, I've heard Micheál Martin say this. I've also read his claims being fact-checked and absolutely dumped in the bin because they don't stack up. That's just something that they like to throw at us. But the facts speak for themselves. So it is a fact that people are paying vast amounts more to rent in this city and county than they were before this government came into office. It's a fact that housing has become more unaffordable. It's a fact that there are more homeless children under this government, that figure is only going up and up every single time. So, the facts contradict Micheál Martin's narrative, and I've heard him say that, and I've heard Simon Harris and others say that. But when you look at the facts, you will see they have made housing, oh my God, so much worse in this state. While on the other hand, we have worked constructively with communities, to try to ensure that public housing is built on public land. I don't think that, I mean, Jesus, that should not be a radical concept. That shouldn't be something that is considered, that is considered in any way radical. Building public housing on public land should be what we do as a matter of course. Sinn Féin councillors will always stand up for that.
I want to ask about your work in the Oireachtas, because over the years you've been a Sinn Féin spokesperson, previously in health and in workers' rights. Now you're focusing on social protection, rural and community development. How do those roles shape your daily work?
So the day is pretty much the same. So a day when you have committee, for some reason I've always had committee on a Wednesday morning. I don't, and I've had 3 separate portfolios and 3 separate committees that met at 9:30 on a Wednesday morning. I don't know how that happened. You couldn't decide it, but your day is shaped by that, by committee. So you'll always have a committee to go to. You'll have your questions that you ask and stakeholder engagement. So stakeholder engagement will be a huge, big part of my day. So ensuring that you're out, you're talking to people, then you obviously you do your constituency work. So not much changes in terms of it's different groups that you're meeting. You're learning. I'm learning. I'm newish in the social protection brief. Obviously, I deal with it as a constituency politician, but I'm newish into it now. So I'm kind of learning as I go and trying to shape the policy in that area. But again, it's pretty much the same kind of, as I say, on the morning when you have committee, you're in early. I'm the chairperson of a committee in this Dáil term, which I wasn't previously. So I chaired the Public Petitions and Ombudsman Committee, and we meet every second Tuesday morning. So again, that shapes your day, your committee attendance. And then the afternoons would generally be for stakeholder engagement, interspersed with speaking, in the Dáil. I'm opposite a minister that I would have been opposite when he was in the Department of Enterprise. So I'm opposite Dáil Éireann. And I would obviously have a good engagement with him and with the department. But, it's pretty much the same. The day is structured in that way. It's different people. It's different groups. But there's not a massive amount of difference, in terms of the actual work. You're trying to formulate policy, you're trying to listen to people, keep an eye to legislation. It's not a very legislative heavy department. Social protection, we've one piece of legislation just gone through there now, but it wouldn't be very legislatively heavy. And neither really was Enterprise wasn't either. So but again, you will get legislation from time to time, and you obviously engage in that. And we've a process that we go through to determine amendments, and some of that will shape the groups that you're meeting. So if there's a particular piece of legislation, the last one I just went through was in relation to bereaved partners, people who weren't married when their partner died, to ensure that they would have access to the widows and widowers pension. And that would have involved meeting groups with specific interests in this and specific expertise who were able to help us in terms of forming a view and engaging with the legislation. That's so the processes are more or less the same. The work is the same but very varied. So you're doing the same thing. You're having a meeting, but it's with a different group of people. And the really interesting thing about this is there's a huge amount going on, particularly in the area of rural and community development. There's a lot happening in terms of social enterprises. There's a lot happening in terms of, TUS and Ross and other schemes. And that's kind of interesting because it's an area that I wouldn't have had a huge amount of involvement. And myself and Conor McGuinness, who's our spokesperson on rural and community development, we would work very closely together to kind of keep an eye to the brief, to keep an eye to what's happening, and then also to be as available as we can to those groups who have a material interest, because I think you need to hear their voice and you need to hear their perspective, because they're people who think about this, the legislation, they think about policy, they're very heavily involved in it, and they bring a really, really good perspective to it.
And a big part of your work is, of course, dealing with the constituency, and you know how important that is when it comes to even just retaining your seat during each election. Dublin Fingal West, you're in one of the country's fastest growing regions, and it's a constituency that's it's no stranger to housing issues, to antisocial behaviour. You've talked a bit about Garda underfunding in the area. I know Fingal's coastal erosion, especially in areas like Rush and Skerries, is an issue. I do want to ask you about a big component of your constituency, and that is Dublin Airport, which is a key local employer. And the most recent news is that they've been given permission to have more nighttime flights and extended hours on the airport's new north runway. Now, we've heard from one community group spokesperson saying that, quote, it will subject thousands of people living around the airport to unnecessary noise and pollution. We've also heard from the head of Ryanair, Michael O'Leary, who is certainly not shy about giving his views, and he says those concerns are, quote, nonsense. He talks about how Well, people bought houses near major airports, so they're going to hear planes. And he says that aircrafts today are a lot quieter than they were 5, 10 years ago. But what's your stance on this, and what are you hearing on the ground from residents?
I don't think anyone takes very seriously what Michael O'Leary said. I think he tends to say things to try to be a bit controversial, and there's no end of, I mean, like, this is July. It's a quiet time, so you tend to hear a little bit more from him in July and August than you would when, say, there are more serious people around. I tend not to listen too closely to what he says. It's very hard to take him seriously, to be frank. My constituents live in the environs of the airport. They're not stupid. They understand what an airport is. They know. But they also know that the airport have a mission to be good neighbours. The airport say they want to be good neighbours. I want the airport to be good neighbours. The airport is a big employer in my area, a driver of economic activity. I think that's, and that has to be acknowledged. A lot of my neighbours work in the airport, and we want to see the airport do well. We want to see the airport thrive. But we also want to see them acknowledge the fact that they are in a residential area. A lot of airports in other jurisdictions are out in the middle of nowhere. They're not near houses and whatever. But Dublin Airport changed the flight path, and people who had never had a plane go over their house ever suddenly had, multiples, what you call it, every 10 minutes they had a plane going over their house, every 14 minutes. So when they changed the flight path, they didn't do proper engagement with the local community. They then had to admit that they'd made an error in the flight path, and they had to change it and all of that. Like, I just want the airport to be good neighbours, to acknowledge the fact that they fly over people's houses, to adhere to the conditions that are put down, that laid down not by me or by any of the residents, but planning. Like, there are planning restrictions that are in place. I'd like to see the airport adhere to those planning restrictions, to do what it is that they are obliged to do, and to do what it is that they say they want to do, which is to be good neighbours. They need to talk to people. They need to accept that, for some people, that, there is a damage that's done when your sleep is disturbed. That's just a fact. That's not me. I'm not making that up. If your sleep is disturbed during the night on a continuous basis, that is damaging to your health. That's not news. You don't need to be a doctor to figure that much out. That's a fact. That's a known fact. The airport need to acknowledge that. They need to come and meet residents halfway and listen to their concerns, not dismiss them, but listen objectively to the concerns that people have. And I don't think that's an outrageous thing for the airport to do. I want to see the airport continue. I mean, as I say, a big employer, a big driver of economic activity. But I also want to see the government engage in a little bit of regional balance here. There's spare capacity. If you talk to people in Shannon Airport, they will tell you that they have spare capacity at the moment. That should be used as well. So, you want to see you want to see the aviation industry pulling every lever that they can, making sure they maximise the use of our regional airports as well as Dublin Airport. Like 92% of all airport-related activity happens in Dublin Airport. And yet you have some flights coming from the US. They land in Dublin Airport. 68% of the people that get off the flight go to the west of Ireland. They could be landing in Shannon. And I think that there needs to be a bit of work done in terms of, balancing that out, looking at the resources that are down in Shannon, looking at the location. It's not located near any residential. It's kind of in the middle of the industrial park. So, like, that's kind of, good. There's good connectivity through the tunnel onto the motorway. So, I think that they could do a lot to look at balanced regional development as well, and not sort of over reliance on Dublin Airport. I mean, we recognise there are planning conditions in place. All we want is for Dublin Airport to adhere to the planning conditions that are there, and to be as good as what they say they want to be. They say they want to be good neighbours, and I would say to the DAA, be good neighbours. Talk to your neighbours, engage with them, listen to them. They're not stupid people. I mean, like the way Michael O'Leary talks sometimes about the people that live near the airport. Like, I think sometimes he thinks he's being funny, God love him, but I mean, the way he speaks about them, that they're not. They understand what an airport is. They live beside the airport. They understand what noise is, but they also understand planning regulations. They also understand noise regulations. They also understand the commitment that they've given to be a good neighbour. So, that's like, they need to be as good as their word.
What's your position on lifting the passenger cap at Dublin Airport, though?
So Sinn Féin had supported lifting the passenger cap, but again, that is a planning condition that was put in place. That wasn't put in place for any concerns other than the fact that the infrastructure just cannot handle it. So, let's talk about the metro. Build the bloody metro, increase that capacity, meet people halfway. It's tough to get in and out to work if you have to drive. So, we've no metro. So a lot of people have to drive. The additional pressure that's placed by the airport on the roads and the surrounding area. That was the reason for the passenger cap. That was the reason for the restriction. So if that's going to be lifted, well, then there needs to be infrastructure to take that additional capacity, because what the roads are like around Dublin Airport. And that's becoming more and more. That used to be only like during the summer and at certain times of the day. It's all the time now. So it's about recognising that, yes, we want to see the airport grow, but we also want to see that balanced regional development. We want to ensure that Shannon is taking the as many passengers as they can handle, and that as I say, the airport is really important in terms of employment and as a driver of economic activity. It can be that in Shannon. It can be that in Cork. I know in Waterford there's a big campaign at the moment that Conor McGuinness and David Cullinan are involved in terms of expanding the runway and ensuring that Waterford Airport can be up and running and servicing people there. Like, there's a lot that can be done in this space. It shouldn't all just be reduced to, well, there's one thing, you're either for it or you're against it, because of course we want to see the airport continue to be that employer, continue to be a driver of economic activity, but also respectful of the environs around it and ensuring that, build the metro. If you want to just build the bloody metro, take the pressure off the roads, ensure that people can get to and from the airport and to and from Swords and, and other places, that my constituents can use the park and ride and get themselves into town. So build the infrastructure. It's not all about just, saying, well, that's it. There was one figure, now there's another figure. It's actually about ensuring that we have the capacity to deal with those passengers that are coming in, and ask the passengers, do you want to land in Dublin? Would you rather go to Shannon? If they'd rather go to Shannon, give them that option.
Circling back to your expertise in trade unions, I mean, Ireland has relatively low rates of union membership in some sectors.
Mm-hmm.
Some business owners worry that strengthening unions or regulations too much could burden small businesses. Your reaction?
No, it won't. In my experience, the trade union movement have been a very positive influence. There's nothing wrong with paying workers a decent wage. There's nothing wrong with workers having decent terms and conditions. There's nothing wrong with sick pay. There's nothing wrong with with proper structured annual leave. There's nothing wrong with career structures. No decent employer has anything to fear from a trade union in their workplace. No decent employer has anything to fear from their workers getting organised and having a seat at the table and being able to bargain. And no decent employer that I've ever encountered would be concerned about their workers having that voice. And there's been a tendency towards kind of over-reliance on, legislation to bring about changes at the level of the workplace for workers. I would like to see the trade union movement getting back to basics, getting back to organising, getting back to that focus on, ground up delivery from at the level of the workplace. Yeah, the legislation needs to be done. That's absolutely a given. And we need to see, say if workers had a proper had a proper seat at the cabinet table, we would see a lot more protection in place. But I would see a government that delivers for working people being one that creates the conditions for workers to get organised. And then it's over to the trade unions to do their job. The purpose of legislators is to ensure that we create that ecosystem so that workers can get themselves organised, can get themselves into trade unions, can get themselves, a seat at the bargaining table. And then, it's up to the unions then to go and do that. It used to be my work. That's not my work anymore, but it's up to them to go and do that. But no decent employer has anything to fear from an organised trade union in their workplace.
I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about the presidential election that we're expected to see this fall. You remember from 2018, Sinn Féin had put forth Leah Narida as the candidate, and she garnered a relatively modest share of the vote then. We fast forward to today, and there is talk of the Sinn Féin leader, Mary Lou McDonald, perhaps going for the presidency. I know she said earlier this year that the position wasn't really for her, and that she felt that the kind of change she wants to implement, you can't do from the office of the president just due to the nature of the job. But she has said, yes, it would be an absolute honour to have the highest office in the land, as they say. Recently, she's changed her tone, saying that she's not, quote, ruling anything in or out, which has brought the speculation back to the forefront. What's your own view on the possibility of Mary Lou seeking the presidency? Is that something you'd like to see her pursue?
I think Mary Lou would make an absolutely smashing Taoiseach. I would love to see her in the office of an Taoiseach. However, as our party president, someone I would consider to be a comrade, a friend, and the leader of our movement, there's no job that she couldn't do. That's a fact. And there's no job that anyone should feel that should be, that she wouldn't be necessarily interested in. But I think what she said, she answered a question. So we went out to a consultative process with our members. That's still ongoing. So we have there's a report being compiled. We'll have a chance to consider that. We're not under any pressure, and yes, everybody in the media wants us to believe that we're playing to some big that there's some kind of big countdown clock somewhere. There's not. We're not under pressure. We have time, and we need to use that time to consider all options. So when she was asked the question, is everything on the table? Are you ruling anything in or out? She said, honestly, we're not ruling anything in or out. And of course, then the next question was put to her, as it inevitably would be. And she repeated her first answer, which is, we're not ruling anything in or out. Everything's on the table and we're going to consider it. We have to see what our members think. So like a presidential campaign, it's a big endeavour for your members to undertake. It's a lot of work. We don't hire out to private companies. Our members hang the posters, they drop the leaflets, they wrap the doors. It's a ground campaign as well as an air campaign. And, the members deserve the right to have their say, to have their views considered, and to see what it is, what direction they want us to go. And so there's a number of options on the table. And we're going to take our time to do that, even though I know, particularly coming into August and everyone, oh, there's no news, let's make some news. That's not that's not news. We're in the middle of a deliberative process. We are having that discussion now. There's a report going to go to the leadership of the party, the collective leadership of the party, and we'll have a chance to consider that. And on the back of that, we'll make a decision. But we're not running to any artificial deadline. We know that there are, there are some deadlines that are set in stone. Obviously, Michael D. Higgins is going to leave the Irish at some point this year, and the election will be called. But we're not under any pressure to make a decision now. In fact, we have the luxury of time to be able to deliberate and to be able to consider and then come to a conclusion on that basis. And my own thoughts on this haven't been fully formed, and I change with the wind, and I think a different thing every day. So I think it's I need time. So I'm sure everyone else does as well, just to consider, what are the options? What would be the best thing? Okay, what would be the best thing for our party, for the state, and also to advance the cause of Irish unity, because I think the Uachtaráin na hÉireann has an important role that he or she could play in advancing the case for Irish unity and ensuring that they are really part of that conversation. So yeah, we have time, and we don't often in politics you have to make a decision very, very quickly, very, very urgently. That's not the case here. So we can relax.
May I ask, though, just your personal thoughts on this possibility? I mean, we've heard over the years the name Gerry Adams come up as a potential person who may want to go for the presidency. Do you think he'd be a strong candidate?
I think he'd be an absolutely fantastic president. Gerry, as somebody in journalistic life, a very senior person who I won't name, said to me, Gerry Adams is a statesman in the absolute meaning of the word. He is a man that could bring a huge amount to that role. I don't believe that he is interested in the role of president. I think that Gerry has done absolutely smashing, phenomenal, and continues to do phenomenal work. And obviously, he's a poet, he's a writer, he's a bit of a part-time chef. He's got a lot going on. He would make a very, very fine president. But I don't know that that's necessarily something he's considering himself.
And just indulge me in this hypothetical situation. Let's say Mary Lou goes for the presidency and she goes on to win. Obviously, that leaves a vacancy as Sinn Féin leader. You've been in the party for almost 10 years now. Is that a position, an opportunity that you would relish if it did come up?
I've been in the party for a lot longer than 10 years. And at the moment, I'm happy with the leader that we have. There's no vacancy currently. And that's not, I genuinely haven't given that any consideration at all. Like, we have the luxury of a bit of time to consider that. I personally, I I don't think that there is a job that you could put in front of our current party president that she wouldn't be equal to the challenge of, including the job of Taoiseach. However, there isn't a vacancy at the top of my party at the moment, and I don't think you, you wouldn't even be thinking about it unless and until that scenario arose. We're certainly not thinking about it now. Well, I'm not anyway. So no, it's not something that I have given any great thought to. So. Mm.
Back in 2020, Mary Lou had said that she could, quote, place Louise O'Reilly in any portfolio and she would shine. That's quite high praise from a party leader. And I guess it speaks to her or the trust and confidence that she clearly has in you. How did you feel when you heard that?
Ah, yeah, well, look, I thought that was a nice thing for her to say. I think it speaks more to my work ethic, perhaps than any massive ability. But I don't know. Look, I have a good work ethic. I'm a hard worker, and I think that my party president recognises that it's more the case that no matter where you put me, I will work hard, and I will always try to bring my own perspective to whatever role it is that I am lucky enough to serve in. But I mean, there's a lot of talent on our front bench. We're actually very lucky in that there's a good team spirit as well. Like, we help each other, we lift each other. We are a collective kind of. We're a good unit. There's a lot of talent on our benches, and I think Mary Lou was lucky that she had a good pool to pick from, and I'm very lucky that she has reappointed me to the front bench.
Do you have a particular portfolio or area where you feel that you would make the biggest impact if Sinn Féin were in government?
Now, I've been asked this a load of times, and you don't get to pick that. So I think it's a bit like it's a bit of a redundant speculation, because at the end of the day, when she's Taoiseach, she'll pick the cabinet, and that will be her decision. And if I have a preference or I don't, I think it is the decision of the Taoiseach that they will make. I would like to think that if I had the opportunity, that I would bring work ethic, that I would bring, maybe a bit of humour, I don't know, to a portfolio, perhaps, and bring that perspective of someone who is very rooted in their community and has a good experience. There's not everyone that sits at the cabinet table maybe has a feeling for what is going on in the lives of ordinary people, and I think we need a few more people like that to sit at the cabinet table. But in terms, obviously, I have a lifetime of experience in terms of workers' rights, and others. But again, I wouldn't be prescriptive. If I was fortunate enough to for the phone to ring, if we as a state were fortunate enough to have Mary Lou as our Taoiseach, and I was fortunate enough to be in possession of a phone that rang, I would, defer to the better judgment of the Taoiseach on that matter.
A few final questions before we finish up. Outside the political arena, who is Louise O'Reilly? I mean, people might be surprised to hear, I hope you don't mind me saying this, that you're a grandmother in your early 50s.
I am. I've been a granny for years. My grandson will be 10 this year. So I was a granny when I was 42. So I'll be 52 this year. My grandson will be 10. So outside of politics, I'm pretty much the same as I am. There's not nothing massive there. I like my daughter and my grandson live in Cork, so every chance I get, I like to spend a bit of time with them. I miss them. I wish I could see them every day, and I don't. I'm very happily married to a wonderful husband, Kieran. We've been together a long time, together since we were very, very young. We're over 30, 31 years together.
Too long.
No, just long enough. Not long enough, actually. And I suppose, I would. Myself and Kieran, we live at the seaside, which is lovely. We live in Skerries, get to go out for nice walks, go out for dinner, that kind of stuff. It's a nice town. I like, I like hanging out with my family. I'm very, very, very lucky in that my three best friends from childhood, we were out the weekend, and we were remarking that we're going to be best friends for 40 years next year, that my 3 best friends in the whole world are still my friends, from when we were kids all the way through. They're not massively political, they're not usually interested in politics, but they are brilliant women. They are 3 of the best women you'd ever meet in your life. And it's good to have that, step out of politics and step back into normal life with people who have, and like there's no messing with people who've known you for 40 years. You cannot, you can, there's no airs, there's no graces, and you will get chopped right back down to earth if they thought you were involved in any of that carry on. So people who've known you for a very long time, it's not that they hold me to account, that I would like to think I don't need it, but yeah, I'm very, very lucky that when I have time, I get to spend time with people who I've been friends with for decades, who are just brilliant women. I have, I'm very lucky. My mum and dad are still healthy, and like, again, I would go to my dad a good bit for advice, and just to bounce stuff off him. I'm really lucky. I have a sister. She has 3 brilliant kids. Like, I'm kind of an auntie when I'm not being a politician. I'm being a wife, a friend, an auntie, a cousin, a ma, a granny, all of that. Although we don't use the G word necessarily. He tends to call me Louise, 'cause that's my name.
And I'm sure one is family, but what are 3 things that really ground you in gratitude?
Family, activism, and travel. Being able and having the privilege of being able to travel and to see a little bit of the world, and to see the good parts of other countries, to be able to experience that.
If you could send one message back to your younger self, what would that be and why?
Oh, yeah, I've been asked this before, and I gave a very facetious answer. Not facetious answer, I gave a very glib answer, which was just relax and get used to curly hair, because it's an absolute charm. My hair is very curly, and it takes a lot to get it to go straight. No, if I could send a message back to myself, it would be just relax more. Don't be such a worrier. Although there's nothing guaranteed if you're a worrier, and I am by nature. If someone tells you not to worry, then you worry. Jesus, why are they telling me not to worry? There should be something I should be worried about. So I would say if I could go back to my younger self, I'd say be a bit easier on yourself, and don't worry about things so much. Relax.
And finally, I know your story is not finished by any means, but if you had to write the title of your own story right now, what would it be?
She worked hard.
She worked hard.
Yeah, I work hard. I like work. I'm really lucky. Loads of people working hard, like busting their ass in jobs, and I did them, plenty of them, where they don't love their work, and they still work hard. There's women coming home from a day on their feet in the hairdressers that would be 10 times more wrecked than I will be when I go home from work tonight. They also work hard. I work hard, and I get to work hard at a job that I really, really love, which is, it is very lucky. But I have always worked, no matter what the job I've had. I'm very lucky. Which would, I've never been unemployed, and I've always managed to have work. Some of it very hard work, some of it work I loved, some of it work I really didn't love, but had to do because you have to pay your rent and do all of that other stuff. But yeah, I work hard, and I'm lucky now that I get to work hard at a job that I love.
On that note, Deputy Louise O'Reilly, thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode with Louise O'Reilly. If you enjoyed it, give us a like and subscribe on YouTube. You can also follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. But the conversation doesn't stop here. You can follow us on all social media platforms for updates, clips, and more. Until next time, thanks for being part of the conversation.